some odd jobs around there, but was back before the end of the year. So he was only there a few months. Dave mentioned the Merchants Exchange Building. The Merchants Exchange Building had a trading hall in it, a beautiful building which still exists and where you can see the best exhibit of Coulter paintings available to the public anywhere. And I really think, I don't mean to denigrate the collection that the Park Service has here, but there are these magnificent murals on the wall of the bank, the California Bank and Trust at 465 California Street. And I urge you all to go have a look at them. I took an old friend in there once, and she looked up and her jaw dropped, visibly. The Merchants Exchange Building was a Daniel Burnham building. He was the major architect in Chicago, but the principal architect here was Willis Polk. He designed a beautiful building which was very advanced for his time, and cargoes were bought and sold, and shipping was arranged on the floor of the trading hall of the Merchants Exchange Building. It was sort of a commodity building, a commodity trading hall. And this painting is entitled Arrived All Well. Willis Polk was the architect. The building was opened in 1905. In 1906, of course, it was severely damaged by the fire. A young woman by the name of Julia Morgan had her offices in that building, and she commissioned my grandfather to do the paintings to fill the arches. This painting measures 14 feet across by 16 feet high. And it's not particularly well lit there, but you can see it. Arrived All Well is a notice that was posted up on the chalkboard on the Merchants Exchange Hall when a vessel arrived and its cargo was designed to, or determined to be well and not damaged. This is the ship W.F. Babcock. He painted the ship W.F. Babcock in that pose many different times. For obvious reasons, I can't say for obvious reasons until I tell you that these paintings are fastened to the wall. They will not be in the show. And Clint Riley would be very upset. But we will have some photographs, some large photographs. But I urge you to go in and see these. They depict a time that Coulter was at his height. Yeah.
They don't have them out, but they have a nice little 2-page description of the building and a little bit about Coulter and the paintings, which is good to have.
And if you want to be accurate, I will say right now, this is not the painting on the stamp.
Not the painting on
the stamp.
Oh.
It may say this was used as a postage stamp in that handout. Because we will have the painting that's going to be that was on the stamp. This is full of Coulter details. Whitehall boat, tugboat, Red Stack tug. By the way, the Red Stack tug fleet was owned by the Crowley family and still is, and it's still run by a Thomas Crowley. In the background, the Golden Gate, Black Point over here, Fort Point way at the end. This is another Coulter mural at the bank. This is called Full and By. The ship is the Dashing Wave, reputed to be the fastest sailing ship of her time on the West Coast. Not that everybody else didn't make that claim. Over here in the background is Tatoosh Island, which indicates that she is just leaving the Straits of Juan de Fuca in the state of Washington and the mainland over here. Full and By indicates the course the ship is, the course the ship is sailing relative to the wind, and Full and By is all the sails are drawing, and she's going about as fast as she can upwind. And she could probably sail closer to the wind than Full and By, but she couldn't sail faster. This is a view of the trading hall as it exists today, although there are a few changes since then. You can see the two Coulter murals up in the arches. There are also 16 other little round vignettes of sailing ships, and some of them will have very familiar names like McNear and Matson. And the ship in the background is not a Coulter painting, that's a Nils Hagerup, and it's a painting of the Gjoa, that's spelled G-J-O-A, but that won't be in this, obviously won't be in this show either, it's not a Coulter. Here is a painting of the Moore Shipbuilding Company, later known as the Moore Dry Dock Company in Oakland, and it shows ships being built for World War I, and a strange dazzle kind of camouflage painted on them. And we will have a view, another painting by Coulter of that similar scene, but we won't have that one, obviously. Coulter went back to work and painted at great length. He painted all the time up until his death. I should say that while he was painting for the newspaper, I should throw this in, he would go to San Francisco on the 115 ferry boat from Sausalito. Probably one of those ferry boats was the Eureka, which you may have toured, which is part of the San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park. And he would make sketches and do his pen and ink drawings, go to his office in the Call building, and then walk back down to the ferry building and be on the 515 ferry home. So he had a pretty nice life. He would work on accounts at home or paint his oil paintings at home in the morning primarily. But this ship, which is a full rig ship, you can see the yards on the mizzen, is reefed down to sail under heavy winds in a storm, and is heeled over and is making very good progress. You can see some little figures up here getting ready to reef one more sail. She's probably a little bit over canvas for what the captain suspects may happen. But I think this shows the Coulter skills of taking a ship that he would not have been able to sit in a little boat out here and paint this scene. He would have to know from his experience what a ship looked like. Okay. We don't know. We'll have a lot of ships we don't know the name. And I don't, names of paintings. I'm really speaking out of turn. You know, Beethoven didn't write the Moonlight Sonata and Coulter didn't paint Under Shortened Sail, but that's what it's called. Okay? I think Coulter painted lots of ships and they were given names at the time it came to sell them. Maybe we ought to take a break and I have a few more slides and then I'll take some questions later. In case you didn't hear it, David mentioned that the scene of the fire is not painted on canvas, the big SF fire. This painting that's over here, it's painted on a window shade. I'm pretty sure that Coulter couldn't find a piece of canvas big enough to what he wanted to paint on after that fire, so he painted it on a window shade. And it hung in the Commercial Club, which was at the corner of Leadsdorf and California Street, a very historical location because that's right about where the waterfront used to come to before the gold rush. And it was then sold to a private collector who's loaning it to us.
What was the material of the window shade?
I don't know what window shades mean, you know, green window shade. Yeah. Linen window shade, fine, yeah. Probably Irish. Came around in a square rigger, right? It's dated 1906. Other than that, I can't say. It's hard to imagine that he finished it in 1906, but he was very prolific, and he did paint quickly. One other little family story about people were asking me about the murals at the Merchants Exchange building. The canvas was stretched on frames which were mounted on the wall, and Coulter painted that in situ. He climbed up on scaffolds and painted them in place. Of course, he did lots of studies for these, and we will have a study or two, and you'll see the paintings themselves in photographs at our exhibition, and there will be some studies that he did in very large format with arched tops for the various panels.
Julie, you may know this. Aren't the Piazzoni murals done in the same manner?
Canvas and attached, yes.
Was that simply the way that muralists did their work in architecture and
A lot of them, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it would have been very practical to do them any other way. If he'd tried to move them from one place to another, they could have been damaged.
You wouldn't want to move a mural.
No.
It's part of building.
As a matter of fact, there are all kinds of stories went around about that. The Merchants Exchange building was owned for many years by the Bank of America, and when one of the previous owners, not the present owner, bought the building, the Merchants Exchange building was sold from the bank to somebody else. The bank was going to take the murals with them, and there was a lawsuit, I understand. Whether it ever got to court, I don't know, but the murals remain. And in fact, murals, I think legally, are parts of buildings. They're not attached. I mean, they are attached. My dad tells about going over and watch my grandfather paint these and climbing up on these scaffolds, bum leg and all. He was just right around 59, 60 years old when he finished the first one, and that the grain and other commodities were still being traded in the hall while he was painting there, and there were sacks of grain around, and the sacks would spill, and grandfather would sweep up some of the grain and bring it home to feed to their chickens. He kept painting, as I said, for the rest of his life, and he went up and down the coast. He did go to Hawaii again, by the way. One of the murals shows Honolulu Harbor, and he went back to Hawaii to get things right and make some sketches for that. This is a later painting of the same scene as you've seen many times before. Felucca, Fort Point. Way off in the distance is Mile Rock, which is now a little bit shorter. It has a automated light on it. It doesn't have a manned light station anymore. Here's another ship coming in through the gate, and Lime Point on the Marin shore, the Golden Gate Bridge across there today, as he would have said, spoiling the view. This painting is entitled Return of the Whaling Fleet. And in the 1870s, although this painting was done much later, in the 1870s, California, in San Francisco in California, was the largest whaling port in the United States. The whaling on the East Coast had declined quite a bit, but whaling on the West Coast had kept going for years and years. And you may remember from your walk through whale boats at the deck. The ship is just dropping anchor. He often did this. This foremast has her sails aback. The main mast has her sails still drawing. This is the only brakes that a ship had, and of course they weren't very good. Sailing ship took a long time to stop. They were not very maneuverable. One of the many reasons that steamships took over eventually was that obviously you had to depend on the strength of the wind, but steamships were a bit more maneuverable because the wash from the propeller went right over the rudder. Here in the foreground, again, a felucca, more ships coming in. You'll see a white stripe along the hull and black ports. These are gun ports. The whaler was not armed, at least not other than for catching whales, and those were just to ward off pirates, and it was very common for ships of the day to have painted ports. Remember that people weren't as literate in those days, and particularly pirates weren't as literate. So they hoped to scare them off.
Is this in the show, Tom?
This will be in the show. I don't know. Roughly 20s, 30s. You guess, wild guess. Yeah. In the background is Angel Island, and I asked everybody last week, and somebody told me, and I've already forgotten it. This rock does not exist anymore. It's Harding Rock, I think. Are there any racers in here that know?
The rock is still there. I don't know if the rock is.
Well, the rock is below
Yeah,
navigation.
but it's true.
And my dad remembers when they blew up the rock, or the day they didn't blow up the rock. They went out, they sent divers down and put dynamite all around the rock and blew it up as a hazard to navigation. People lined the shore and went out in boats to see the big explosion, and it didn't go off, and he remembers they had to do it again the next day. Marin Shore. Yeah, there won't be a quiz on that one. If I can't remember it, please.
That's fun. People like that kind of.
Yeah. So this is Marin, Mount Tam. Out here is Point Bonita. This, we believe, is the H.F. Alexander, and there will be a different painting of the H.F. Alexander in the show. But I like this painting. First of all, a foggy morning in San Francisco. Here's the waterfront, the ferry building there. Steamer is, a tugboat is pulling a sailing ship out from her pier. But here's the feature of this. This is a hay scow, and you saw the hay scow that the park has. The steersman is up on a pulpit in the stern of the hay scow looking over the load. She's got a heavy load of hay on her. Remember that at the time that the hay scows were used, you had option of bringing hay down in carts, or also you could bring it on railroads, I guess, on barges. But you could put a huge amount of hay on a scow and bring it down rather slowly. Take about 3 days to get down from Sacramento, let's say. And the H.F. Alexander is one of the early steamship families named for Alexander of Alexander and Baldwin, who now owns Matson Lines. This is the Carmen 20-cent stamp dated 1923, and this painting that was used for the stamp is once again the W.F. Babcock coming through the Golden Gate, or having come through the Golden Gate. And if you look carefully at each of these, and I didn't show them in sequence purposely because you'll have to, as you go through the show, you'll see several paintings of the W.F. Babcock. And the painting from which this stamp was made will be in the show. And there will be a little sign that we just acquired a week ago from Home Fire and Marine, which was one of the companies owned by Fireman's Fund, who was a major insurer who made it through the 1906 earthquake and kept going. And I'm not sure whether it wasn't a government bailout there, too. But this painting will be in the show, and I'll have a stamp in the show. It's better to look at it like this because obviously it's stamp-sized. Here's another familiar, this is a stylized version of the city of Tokyo, which you saw in a much earlier painting, the very smudgy, smoky painting. And Folgers used this image for years on coffee and spices. And they kept, how shall I say, modernizing it. Well, Coulter painted the painting from which it was taken. Yeah.
Did he get any rights from that?
Sorry?
Did he get any rights from that, just out of curiosity?
I have no idea. He was never a wealthy man.
Never a wealthy man, I understand.
None of his children became artists at the insistence of their mother.
She was very practical.
No son of mine is going to be an artist. been married to one for a long time trying to make ends meet. And I guess his personality was somewhat whimsical. He liked to tell jokes. He liked to dance. By the way, he did not drink. And any Irishman that doesn't drink might be suspect. But he could be kind of a pain about it, which makes me think he might have had a few at some time in his life. But according to family records, he was a teetotaler, and he could lecture people about drinking. This is a ship with all her sails set. It shows another aspect of sailing, looking for a breeze. She's in the moonlight and obviously not moving anywhere, but still sort of a beautiful, peaceful scene. And yeah, that's a good question. The problem is this is mine, and I can never remember which ones of mine are going in. A shipwreck, probably off the Marin coast. I don't know the name of the ship, but you can see how they would rescue. They would try to row boats through the surf and get lines aboard or lines ashore. Ships often had a cannon, a very small cannon that would fire a little ball to which they'd attached a line to get rope. And you know, I'm using the term line, which is correct. The crew is obviously being rescued. I don't think there's any hope for the ship or the cargo. This is an Alaska packer. The Alaska packers' vessels were a real boon to Coulter because had it not been for the Alaska packers, he wouldn't have had many subjects to paint late in his life. This Alaska packer is shown off farallones. Notice how the farallones have changed over the years. They've gotten a little rounder, and I guess they wore down, didn't they? He didn't just paint ships, he did paint lots of other things. He liked to go up north in the bay in the fall and paint various scenes. He painted this for the ladies in the family. This has come sort of to be my wife's favorite, but he painted this for his daughter and his daughter-in-laws, painted this kind of scene. It's the Eel River in autumn, and this is a moonlight scene at Angel Island. There's a schooner making for Ayala Cove, which is over here. The lights of Richmond show in the background. I believe this is in the show. I can't say. There's a fire burning on the beach. Somebody's got a bonfire going and having a picnic right about where the wharf is, that the State Parks wharf is located today. Here's a photograph of two of the Coulters. That's William Coulter on the left with the Van Dyke beard, and too bad it's dark. It's not darker. The twinkle in his eye almost shows in his photograph. He loved to sail. The family always had boats on the bay. The figure on the right is my father, James, probably at the age of around 16 or so. And I don't think he really enjoyed sailing as much as Grandpa did. In the background, though, look, square rigger, just right in the bay. Just typical scene. The Coulter family had small boats. They'd buy used or condemned lifeboats. They'd rebuild them at home or in one of the shops along the shore, and they'd rig them with centerboards and sails, and they'd go off on picnics all over the bay. We have some wonderful photographs, and I think some of them will be in the show. The family going off. Notice, you can't see from this, but they're both wearing neckties. You wouldn't go out without a necktie, even if you were about to get wet. And they would go picnicking at Belvedere or San Quentin, which was a lovely beach before the prison was built, and they'd have two boats. They had a little power boat with a small gasoline engine which would tow the other boat, and these boats would be loaded down. They would have a 20-foot boat with 20 people in it, and the ladies would be wearing picture hats and white dresses and some scarves and high-button shoes, and the gentlemen would be in bowlers, and they'd be off for a picnic. Probably didn't even know what a life jacket was, and I guess they generally made it back. This is the San Carlos, Coulter's painting of the first European ship to enter San Francisco Bay. You may recall that she entered in August of 1775, and within that year, Mission Dolores was founded. Now, Coulter obviously couldn't have seen the San Carlos, and no plans of her ever existed, so he painted what he knew about Spanish ships of the time, and he was probably pretty accurate. She's got all her guns run out because the Spanish were wondering about were the Indians friendly or not. She had her ship's boat in the water and being rowed alongside. They didn't know how deep the bay was, of course. They suspected they might run aground. All they had were lead lines. And notice she has her mainsail and her foresail furled. They didn't want to be going too fast if they did run aground and jam the boat hard on. In the background is the Marin shore, Point Bonita over there. And this, I believe, is supposed to represent a small native reed canoe. And I think this painting is going to be in the show. So if you want to have a discussion about the San Carlos, we could, because my idea is as good as anybody else's. This is a tranquil scene on the bay in the morning. This painting is quite blue in color. We have here a hay scow loaded with hay, looking for a breeze. Typical ship, that's a whaler. Red stack tug, more vessels in the background. Looks like Alcatraz over here once again. There's Tamalpais and the tongue of fog just burning off, right where we want to go hiking these days. This painting was also stolen. Fortunately, and partly from the use of this image, the art detail located it and got it back. And I think this painting is going to be in the show. I'm not sure. The Marin County Beach on a lovely day. I don't know how many times we've gone over with the kids from Berkeley to get out of the hot weather when it got up to the 80s and found this over there. This is Jolly's Beach in the fog. When Coulter was 78 years old, his daughter got married. She would have been 35, 36, I can't remember exactly what. And he and his wife left that day by steamship for Ireland, sort of a last visit. He had sold Burning the Blue Light, his painting that he held in the family for many years. And he bought passage on a steamship and went through the canal. And we have some wonderful family letters that came from my grandmother about how he was getting a little unstable, but since he'd always been such a good sailor, the rocking of the ship was of no trouble to him, but he was just beginning to have a little trouble walking. He went to Ireland and stayed over the winter, and grandmother sent little letters home to her daughter, and she described all important details, like at the time they were off the coast of Mexico, they changed from wool underwear to silk underwear. And when they were in Ireland, grandfather being a teetotaler and my grandmother being a somewhat younger woman, heard the sounds of revelry in the town. I think that's the phrase she used. But of course, we stayed here and had a quiet evening on New Year's. I think she wanted to go downtown. No, this is Derry. That's River Foyle with a steamer putting out to sea. River Foyle is navigable up to Derry. And Derry's a beautiful old town. This is always nice in the family because there's been some sort of myth perpetrated by the Irish that it doesn't really snow in Ireland. Well, of course it snows in Ireland. And we took a walk along this. Unfortunately, this is now a dual carriageway, and there's a big multi-story car park right about here. But you can still see that same line in the trees. And people just don't visit. Derry and Londonderry, they're the same city. It depends whether you're English or Irish, right? And it's a city that has been known for the Troubles and some ill feeling between the factions, and people just don't visit there much anymore. Little waterfall near where he grew up. My wife and I walked up to this waterfall one afternoon. We were in Ireland on a beautiful week, a really un-Irish week. We didn't have a drop of rainfall on us for 7 days. And we walked up, and the waterfall was very small and very trickly. There wasn't much water running. We stopped and had tea and scones on in a little tea house nearby. And when we got back, we were so pleased with ourselves. Came home and developed the pictures, and we'd walked up the wrong stream. This is on a lee shore, something that Coulter painted a lot. You'll see a very similar painting right over in the Streamline building over here, the Maritime Museum. This ship is having to claw her way off ashore. It's a dangerous position for a ship to be in. The wind is blowing toward us. The ship is being blown toward those rocks, but you sort of see that she's going to make it. She probably ought to tack pretty soon. But a late Coulter, typical storms, more of an action shot, and shows how his water has changed from his early days.
That's not the Hawaiian one, right?
It's what?
That's not the Hawaiian one.
No,
Right.
no,
That's different
no.
on the lee shore.
Yeah. And the painting of the lee shore does not have the Falls of Clyde in it. If you'll, am I right, Dave? It's a painting that was instrumental in saving the Falls of Clyde.
Yeah, Carl, the founder of the museum used that painting to point out that there's a real ship in danger on a lee shore, as shown as the painting illustrated, and that ship was the Falls of Clyde, and out of that came fundraising, which eventually saved and restored the ship, which is on exhibit today in Honolulu.
This is another scene of the W.F. Babcock. This is, again, not the stamp scene. In the background is a fast twin-funneled steamship. The usual Coulter characters here: felucca, red stack tug, hay scow. Maybe that isn't a hay scow. I'm not sure. I better take. I should know that one because that's one of mine, and that will be in the show. But the W.F. Babcock appears again and again, and there will be, I think, 3 images of the W.F. Babcock in the show, not counting what's in the stamp. This is my last slide, and it's really one of my favorites because I think this sort of epitomizes what Coulter wanted to get across. Some of the other ones were painted to please the client, but this was painted to please himself. He'd been to sea in conditions like this. The ship is burying her bows in the sea. She's just driving in a heavy wind with a squall. It's kind of what it's all about. It epitomizes the conditions under which Coulter and all sailors had to sail, particularly if they were coming around the Horn or getting somewhere up here. I don't know the name of the ship. It's a relatively small painting. This one will not be in the show. There's kind of a few more things you might want to know about William Coulter. As I keep mentioning, he was very prolific. In 1934, he had his last exhibition, and he showed 75 canvases that were painted after the age of 80. When he died in March 16th, 1936, he had a canvas on his easel. The Golden Gate Bridge was partially completed, and it appeared in the painting, and he had a biplane in the air. That was not his first airplane, and we do not have that painting, and I don't know where it is. But there will be a painting of the 1915 exposition, which is, of course, right up the waterfront here, where the Palace of Fine Arts still lingers. And there's a biplane in that painting, too. He died in March 16th, as I mentioned, 1936. Like all good Irishmen and sailors, we think he went to Fiddler's Green, where he's probably playing his fiddle. He's buried in the Fernwood Cemetery in Mill Valley, and I've gone back to look at his grave. If you want to make a pilgrimage up there, be aware there's a beautiful green plant called poison oak all around. There's a little postscript. In November of 1943, Kaiser Shipyard in Richmond launched the Liberty ship William A. Coulter, and I remember that. You can't forget that when you're a little kid and there are all these adults trying to float a ship on whiskey. She went through the war, is reputed to have downed a Jap plane. I don't know how, but they were all equipped with guns. I don't know how but I guess by the end of the war, the Jap pilots weren't all that good either. But she came out of the war and was eventually scrapped in Richmond, and we will have the ship's bell in our exhibit. Now, if you're going to ask me how I know the ship's bell, it's because my cousin bought it. It doesn't say anything on it, and we were unable to get the builder's plates. But we have some pictures of her being dismantled up over in Richmond. I want to thank you for your kind attention. I also want to say something about the park. I really would be remiss if I couldn't say what a wonderful job the Park Service has done for us and how they've helped us with this exhibit. And we must recognize that in spite of this beautiful library and the museum over there, the Park Service has to keep those old ships afloat and keep them from disappearing. There won't be any more after that. That'll be the end. And we don't have a painting of the Balclutha, I'm sorry to say, but it's important that we support this effort here and the Park Service. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have. Yeah.
You mentioned that Coulter wanted to be a musician. Did you say just a little bit?
Right. Well, I don't know. He always played the violin, and he was known for playing the violin and for the family and at parties, and he could dance Irish jigs even though he had a bad ankle, and all we know is that he probably couldn't make a living at it, so that's why he took up painting. He really wanted to be a musician. And that's why William Hahn showed him that. Remember, William Hahn usually painted people at work of some kind or another. If he painted cowboys, they were roping cows. If he painted hunters, they had just shot a bear. If he painted miners, they were digging in the ground. And he painted Coulter playing the violin, not painting. I don't know why. Maybe there was professional jealousy. By the way, we will be selling, both as a fundraising and as an adjunct to our exhibit, these posters, and we are also preparing a catalog which will be ready by the opening on the 17th. We'll have 500 of them here. The catalog will be full color. It'll be 56 pages long, and it will have every image that we have in the show. We hope that after the rush to get this started goes, that we'll be writing a book with lots of good Coulter images in it. But I should tell you that because there's not a lot written about Coulter, you probably know as much as I know about him now, other than the many, many, many stories that I heard at home, and I hope I keep remembering them. I mean, he seemed to be a bigger-than-life character, although he was a very small man. He was 5'5", and he was very strong. We have pictures of him rebuilding his house when it burned down in 1919. He lost all his paintings in 1919. They were all home. He lived at 4th and Valley Streets. He had a beautiful big house, and he built back a much smaller house. Of course, by then his boys were away. I had gone on to jobs other than being artist, as I mentioned. So I'd be happy to answer any further questions. I also would like to be with you on your walkthrough. And yeah, there's one here. And Yeah.
You mentioned seeing paintings for the first time. Were they in Hawaii?
Yes.
So, in a museum or private?
No, both. Well, I saw the Bishop Museum has a very heavily damaged painting of the Ermgard, a beautiful brigantine, and, barkentine. And she's a major work of his, but it's so badly damaged I couldn't read the year it was painted, although he stopped dating his paintings around the turn of the 20th century. Although he did date the fire scene, and that's his signature in the lower right corner. Yeah, Jill.
I read that he had a studio on Montgomery Street. If he did his painting at home, what did he do at the studio?
Well, that was earlier. He painted at home after he had a home. I don't know where he lived in San Francisco. He did his painting in Sausalito after he got married. He got married in 1891. Go ahead.
Yeah, how was cargo stored on the mast?
And
One of the paintings you said that cargo was sometimes stored on the mast?
did I say that? I didn't mean to.
Load cargo.
Oh, the masts were used, the boom and the mast could be used to load cargo, not store. They were used, by storing cargo, I mean they got it ashore, they got it from, yeah. It was a three-masted steam schooner. Yeah. And on the steam schooners you would see a mast and booms, but they were cargo booms. They were not sailing booms. And by storing, that's not a good choice of words. And there were a couple other, yeah, Mel.
In that picture, it kind of looks like the sails are backed. Would that be because she was tacked?
No, she's driving. No. That's not what I see. Yeah.
Two questions. What is class of the Babcock? Right.
I think she's a full rig ship.
And what's the difference between a barkentine and a brigantine?
That's the one question that I wish you hadn't asked me. Let me. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try. That's right. A brigantine has two masts and a fore and aft sail on the mizzen and square sails on the foremast. A barkentine has has square sails on the foremast, but it has more than two masts, and is fore and aft rigged on all but the foremast. You're trying to catch me out. You've got your sheet right in front of you.
I love that one of the rangers said that there'll be a ranger always at the visitor's desk, and for nautical questions, we can direct them to the expert. We can tell the good stories.
We were going to get his violin for the show, and I say we're going to get, but you know what happens to violins in families? They get passed from father to son. So when William Coulter died, it went to his youngest son who played the violin. And then when he died, he went to my cousin Bill, who was his namesake, William Alexander Coulter II. And when Bill died, they gave it to somebody who played the violin. And the lady plays the violin, and she doesn't really want to give it back because she plays it. And we're going to be going for 6 months, and it was just too much to keep it. We have his hat, and we have some other little artifacts of his, too. He went back to Ireland to visit his brother in 1928, and he left on his daughter's wedding day.